Okay, so we're on now for the recording. For those who may be kind of watching back, and for those who are here with us today, very warm welcome. Thanks for joining us for this first session as part of Class of 2022 week, the second one that we've done this year. And this session is all about thinking about postgraduate studies. So the title is, so you're thinking about postgrad study. Sounds fairly kind of does what it says on the tin. I'm going to provide a little bit of an agenda, a little bit of a kind of breakdown of what we're going to be covering today. But really, this is an opportunity for you to ask any questions you might have about postgraduate study if it's something you're considering. And hopefully kind of through the course of the session, I'll be able to kind of cover and sort of answer some of those key questions you might have if you're thinking about further study after completing a degree. So my name is Chris Webb. I'm a Senior Employability Advisor with the Sheffield Hallam Careers and Employability Service, if you've not met me before. I've included my email address on the slide, so if you've got any questions at all sort of off the back of the session today, anything that you want to talk about that's related to postgrad study that you feel we didn't cover as part of the session, feel free to drop me an email. I'm more than happy to answer any other questions as a follow-up. Now, before we kind of get started, I just want to get a bit of an impression of who we've got with us here today and what's kind of brought you to this session. So what I'm going to do is put a link in the chat in a second. It's the link that's at the bottom of this page, which is www.polev.com/ChristopherW685. Just to kind of get your anonymous thoughts on, what's kind of brought you here today, why you've sort of come to this session today. So I'm going to share that link in a second, and I'm just going to ask you to input that link into either your web browser on Google Chrome or on a phone or on a tablet, and just basically select one of the three options that I'm going to show you in a second. So I'm going to pause this recording and I'll just pop that in the chat for you now. So just for those who are with us on the recording, we can see this is who we've got with us on the session today, and this is kind of what's brought them to the session. So real kind of mixture, some people who feel quite confident that postgrad study is the right option for them, looking for additional support, and some people who are maybe not really that sure and feel that they're going to need some additional information to help them with those next steps. So hopefully what we cover in the session today will sort of broadly kind of match up to where you're at the moment at this point in the process, thinking about postgrad study. And obviously, if there's any specific information that we're not able to cover, please do kind of ask questions and please do let us know, what else maybe you'd like to know that we haven't had the chance to look at today. So just before we kind of start the session sort of proper and kind of cover some of the information that will hopefully answer those questions you've got today, just one final poll, just for a little bit of individual information, I guess, from your own perspectives, again, anonymously, about what sort of interests you in undertaking a postgraduate course or further study. So a little bit of a follow-up to kind of what's brought you here today, but a little bit more specific information. What's kind of interests you particularly about taking a postgraduate course or further study after finishing your degree? So again, I'm going to just update the poll very quickly. If you use the same link, the one at the bottom of the page that I've showed you before, it should provide you with a free text box. And I'd just like you to share a really, really just short summary of, again, what interests you in undertaking a postgraduate course or any form of further study. And again, this will help inform some of the stuff that we talk about today. So I'll pause the recording again. So we're back on the recording now and just kind of looking at some of the thoughts that have come through from our attendees today, all anonymous, obviously, about kind of why they're interested in postgrad study. So really nice, again, to see a really broad mix of what's brought people here today. For some people, it's about perhaps being fully qualified, again, depending on sort of what that means, whether that's kind of related to a particular industry or perhaps due to just kind of wanting to have seniority within a particular kind of sector or industry, and potentially linking to higher pay, which we're going to kind of talk about because, again, that's something that's really worth interrogating. For some people, it's about maybe specialising. So a really kind of interesting point there. Someone feels their bachelor's is maybe a bit too broad. It's about perhaps specialising in a particular area, maybe linked to their existing degree, maybe something separate, which we'll kind of come on to. For other people, it's about maybe more opportunities within their career. And someone's kind of gone even a little bit more specific than that, sort of talking about wanting to do a very particular job. So, thinking about potentially becoming a lecturer, at degree level, and the master's being kind of a pathway towards that, or a potential pathway towards that. So thanks to all those who've kind of shared your thoughts. This will really sort of inform kind of some of the stuff that we talk about today, and particularly in relation to some of the stuff around kind of career opportunities and pay, which I know is, key factors sometimes that people look at when they're considering things like further study. So So I'm going to kind of move through the sort of bulk of what we're going to kind of cover today. And the main thing I just want to remind people of is if you've got questions as we go along, please do share them via the Zoom chat. Please do let me know if you want to come off microphone at any point, you want to ask questions directly. I can pause the recording. Really want this to be kind of more of a dialogue, more of a discourse, rather than just kind of information presented at you. So yeah, if there are things as we go through that aren't clear or kind of additional questions you have, please just let me know. So in terms of what we're going to kind of cover today, the main sort of, I guess, bulk of what we're going to be talking about is around, things to consider when you're looking at postgraduate study. And some of those will kind of be practicalities, so things around, for example, finance, applications, those type of things. And some of these will be around actually thinking about, is postgraduate study the right thing at this particular point in time for you? And that's kind of what I want to start with, really, because I think it's the core sort of essence of, I guess, really the questions you have to consider before maybe kind of going along with postgrad studies. So these are kind of some of the key questions I think it's really important to kind of just bear in mind as you're going through that process of going, is postgrad study the right thing for me at this point in time? And we're also going to look at obviously some of the different types of postgraduate study, because although typically a lot of people, when they think postgraduate, they think masters, we're kind of going to be looking at some of those other areas as well. So not just things like PhDs, but also postgraduate diplomas, certificates, and additional kind of training and development. So it's not always just masters related. So these are kind of some of the key questions I think it's always worth asking yourself when you're looking at postgrad study. Again, what type of postgrad degree do you want to do, or do you want to apply for? And we're going to be looking through some of those different options in a couple of minutes. The second point is around, is it essential for your career? So this is a really, really important thing to consider. And again, I'm going to be sharing with you some resources later that you can use for kind of undertaking a bit of this research, interrogating, that question really. For a lot of people, when they look at postgrad study, they sometimes think, okay, yes, it is, something I have to do, for a particular job. And in certain industries, that's true. So some good examples of that would be things like teaching, for example. At this point in time, you have to do a kind of a PGC or some form of postgraduate teacher training in order to qualify as a teacher. So that's a very fair one to kind of identify. And the same is also true for things like law, for example. Again, whether that's something that you're doing as a direct route from doing an undergraduate law degree or as a kind of conversion course, still some form of postgraduate study is needed. And true for things like psychology, if you haven't done an accredited undergraduate degree. So for example, if you've done something like education psychology and counselling, but you wanted to train in clinical psychology, you'd then need to do the MSc psychology conversion course in order to get that kind of accreditation. So there are sort of routes where, yes, it is definitely essential for you, but there are lots of routes where it isn't. And that's where it's really, really important to kind of interrogate that question and think, okay, do I definitely need this course in order to undertake postgraduate study? If I do, great. How have I found out that information? If I don't, are there other options that I could consider? And, is studying the way that I want to get those additional skills or kind of knowledge, or are there other ways that I can do that fits me better? The third point down there is around, are you kind of passionate about the subject? Again, a really important question to ask yourself. It's quite easy sometimes, I think, to fall into the trap of going, finish undergraduate study, go straight on to postgraduate study. And again, for some people, it's just sort of that natural, or what they feel is a natural progression, even if they're not necessarily sure it's the right thing for them to do at this point in time. So some of the stuff that we're going to look at today is definitely around, is postgraduate study the right thing for you right now? And there might be good or kind of bad reasons for that. And again, there might be pros and cons of doing that now versus doing that in the future. But certainly kind of being interested, passionate about the subject is particularly important at postgrad level, because again, it's an increase in independent study. It's also an increase in often the amount of work that you're having to do, or kind of the intensity potentially of the work that you're doing. So it is really important to consider that as well. That fourth question is exactly what I've just mentioned. So, is postgrad study the right thing for you now at this point in your career? We'll talk a little bit more about this when we come on to some of the finance side, but it's really important to think about, using your postgrad finance, I guess, kind of carefully, because you only get it once. So once you've kind of taken out something like a master's loan, for example, for, any kind of master's course from the government, you can only use that one time. So the next time you choose to do a master's course, you then have to fund that yourself. Can be quite an expensive endeavor. So it's really important to think about, is this the right thing for me right now? Am I kind of ready? Do I feel that, it's essential for me now, or is it something that I could kind of come back to in the future? There is no right or wrong answer to this. Some people choose to do their master's courses or postgrad courses directly after finishing undergrad, and often have good reasons for that. Sometimes it's about needing it to progress within their career. Sometimes it's about them feeling in the right mindset, feeling very passionate about the subject, wanting to take that forward. For some people, it's about specializing, like we heard in the survey we saw earlier. Very broad undergraduate degree, wanting to specialize in an area that they've become very interested in. But for some people, it's not the right thing right now. And actually spending time in work and spending time in industry can help give you a better idea about what type of further study or postgraduate course could be more useful for you in the future. So many people do decide to take that time away from university first to explore different areas before coming back to postgrad study. So again, it is very much individual, it's very subjective, but it's useful to kind of bear that question in mind. The fifth question, which we're going to be looking at in a little bit of detail, is, can you afford it? So, is this something that you can kind of afford at this point in time? What are the financial options available for you? What's out there? What sort of support's out there should you need it? And that final question is around those sort of next steps. So we're going to be looking at, what actually comes next. You've thought about postgrad study, you're interested in it, you think you'll be able to afford it. Is there anything else that's kind of troubling you about, those next steps? Anything else you might feel you need additional support with, and what support can we provide at the university to help with that? So all of that I'm going to be covering in the session today. If there's anything that's not on the screen in front of you right now that you're thinking, okay, I've got questions about this and I don't think those areas will cover all of that, please do pop it in the Zoom chat. And obviously I can pick up any additional points that maybe we're not covering as part of the session directly from individuals as those questions come through. So yeah, don't hesitate, please, to ask any questions. So I think, kind of coming back to that sort of first question really around, is sort of postgraduate study the right thing for me? And more importantly, I guess, what type of course am I looking to do, or what type of course am I looking to study? This is where kind of research really becomes a massively important part of postgrad study. Often with kind of undergrads, and this is not true for everybody, but often with undergraduate level, by the time we get to the point where we're having to decide about going into undergraduate study, we haven't had a huge amount of time to, explore the things that we're, interested in from an academic point of view. We haven't had maybe as much experience within the workplace or within industry. But certainly when it comes to kind of postgrad, having had that undergraduate experience, you're now much more informed about what universities can offer, what courses can offer. And this kind of puts you a bit more in the driving seat in terms of looking at different opportunities. So these are kind of some of the key things that we would suggest, as you're starting to think about postgrad study, key things to research, key things to look at, any of the courses that you might be considering. So the first one is around kind of teaching styles. So again, you've had that experience of undergraduate now. If you're looking at doing a taught master's course or postgraduate course, you're going to want to kind of know about teaching styles, the content, how do they assess, for example, on that course. And of course, over the past couple of years, one thing that will have become really important to everyone is, what does that digital or online offer look like? Is most of the course going to be online, remote? If so, would that be an advantage? Would that mean that you could look at universities outside of your local area? Or, are you wanting to do a master's or a postgraduate course that has got more of a focus on a physical setting? So do you want to be based at that university, and do you want something that's going to have quite a lot of in-person teaching? If so, those are really important things to kind of check out. Expected independent study. This is kind of usually quite a big difference for postgraduate courses from undergraduate courses. So thinking about, how much of the study on that course is going to be expected to be independent? How many hours would that equate to per week? Will that give you time to do other things alongside that? And we'll talk about this a bit more when we come on to the finance side. But a lot of people, for example, will work part-time alongside doing postgraduate courses. So again, that's always useful to check out, what is the expected kind of independent study that might be needed. It's also worth looking at things that are kind of connected to the next steps after the degree. So looking at things like alumni experiences and graduate destinations. So how does the university help students on those courses to move on to the next steps, and where have some of those graduates gone previously? So if you're doing a course, for example, that, you feel, okay, this is going to make a big difference to my career, it's going to help me get command higher pay, maybe get job roles with more responsibility, can you kind of check that first? Can you sort of almost fact check that, against your own perceptions by speaking to those universities or checking out their kind of online prospectuses? Where do some of their graduates go? what sort of percentage of their graduates move on to related graduate roles in that industry? How does the university help people to do that? So it's not always about jobs, and for many people, doing postgrad study is just about, as we saw in the survey earlier, taking kind of your interest and passion in the subject further. But as we also sort of saw in that survey, for some people, it's a really important thing about, okay, where could this take me afterwards? If I'm going to be investing all of this money into a master's or a postgrad course, where could it take me afterwards? And that's something that you can actually kind of interrogate through the research you do. So a couple of websites that are really useful for looking at this sort of thing are Find a Master's and Find a PhD, fairly common sense website titles. They've not just kind of got search engines for finding postgrad courses. The other thing that they've also got is a really good advice section about how to choose different postgraduate courses, some of the differences between the courses, which we're going to talk about in a second, and also kind of how to find out about things like the rankings and reputations within a specialism. So you'll see that there are kind of league tables for university courses and kind of just general universities online. A lot of those league tables are normally about undergraduate level, but you will be able to find stuff that's focused on postgraduate courses as well, and get an idea of where they are within the kind of the national picture. So, for example, if you found a postgraduate course in, let's say, advanced engineering management, you might want to see, well, how do they compare to other universities around the country? And again, you can find some of that information online. As we spoke about at the beginning, it's really important to consider the types of postgraduate study. Some of this might sound really obvious, but actually it is a much kind of busier picture, I guess, than undergraduate study, where often it's a case of just thinking, is it going to be a BA or a BEng or a BSc, but generally still within that 3-year undergraduate framework. Postgraduate study, much broader, lots and lots of different options. So, for example, we've got the kind of typical, what we would call sort of those taught master's courses, where, again, most of the modules are taught. There's going to be that big independent research project at the end, but they fall typically into similar specialisms to the undergraduate courses. So Master of Arts, Master of Science, for example. But there are some other specialisms as well. So, for example, MEng as a Masters of Engineering, MPhil, Masters of Philosophy. And it's also kind of worth noting that those taught master's courses also include what we'd call conversion courses. So something whereby you might need to take that course to convert to maybe a subject area that's slightly outside of your undergraduate degree. And we gave some examples earlier, so things like teaching, for example. There are some kind of slightly different master's courses as well. So the MRes, the Masters of Research, this is where most of the learning takes place through independent research projects. So there's less kind of taught content and more of it is, done through independent research briefs and projects. And there's also kind of courses like the MBA, which you might be familiar with, Masters of Business Administration, usually something that people kind of do after they've got some years of professional experience under their belt and they're looking to kind of upskill within kind of sort of a business management, business development capacity. So again, there are different master's degrees out there. It's just worth being aware of those kind of different sort of categories. And then in terms of other types of postgraduate courses, there's a real range. So things, for example, like postgraduate diplomas and certificates, these are at master's level, but they've got fewer credits. So they don't normally have that long independent research project at the end, which makes something that kind of master's degree. But often these are kind of still at the master's level, and they're quite often sort of tailored towards a more vocational element. So, for example, things like youth work, or kind of, I guess, maybe specific areas that are connected to a subject area but might not require someone to do a master's, but it's still that further level of study compared to what you've done at undergraduate. So postgraduate diplomas and certificates, there's quite a lot of them around. Key thing to be aware of with PG certs and PG diplomas is that the master's loan from the UK government doesn't cover those qualifications. So again, it's something to consider when you're looking at kind of finance and looking at different sort of postgraduate courses. And then finally, we also have things like PhDs. So again, some of you may be familiar with PhDs already. These are kind of the 3 to 6 year sort of long-term independent research kind of qualifications. Some of these are sort of integrated with a master's. So some of these can be done sort of alongside a master's course, but they don't all have to be done after completing a master's. So it is possible to apply for PhDs directly from undergraduate study. And indeed, some people do choose to do that if there are relevant opportunities available. Again, I've included some information on here on the link on the slides that I'll send across to you, which shows you how to find out more information about PhDs through the Prospects website if you've not kind of come across them before. And then the sort of final area, which again is worth sort of being aware of and worth kind of digging into if you've not come across it before, is just looking at more kind of general professional level qualifications. So these are kind of qualifications that are sort of done to help develop your career within a specific sort of industry. They don't necessarily have to be done direct from undergraduate study. They might be things that are part of a master's, or they might be kind of things that are just sort of independent to that. So again, a good example of this might be a kind of graduate employer that needs you to upskill in a particular type of technology. So it might be, say, cloud technology, and they might provide, say, a 12-week course that you can undertake in order to upskill in that area before you move on to a relevant graduate job. So some of these might even be training courses that are provided by employers, and some of these might be separate training courses. But it's just worth being aware that not all of further study is necessarily that kind of full year or 2-year sort of accredited qualifications, but sometimes can be more industry specific qualifications that are linked to particular skill areas. And again, I've included some examples here on the link on the slide, just in case you want to have a look into this area in more detail. So I'm just going to go kind of move through the application process now for postgrad, because again, it's something that can differ slightly to undergraduate study for those who are not less familiar with it, I guess. Just before I do that, if anyone's got any questions, please do pop them in the chat. If there's anything that I haven't covered as part of the sort of content so far, let us know, and I can pick those questions up directly sort of within the chat and include them as part of the session. So in terms of the application process, again, this is something that's kind of worth bearing in mind is slightly different to undergrad study. So again, for most postgraduate courses, the vast majority, you'd usually apply directly via the university. Some of these might be done through a different platform. So for example, UCAS postgraduate would cover things like nursing. The Department for Education has got a new system, which is where people apply for teacher training courses. So there are some slightly different systems, but the vast majority would be applying directly through the university. Deadlines may be different, compared to what they've been in previous years. So, the past couple of years always come with a bit of a caveat about COVID and about how universities have changed the way that they do things. With postgraduate courses, there's never been maybe a kind of a one-size-fits-all application window like there is with undergraduate study. It's very much down to that university and down to that course in terms of how they recruit or where they recruit. So some university master's courses might recruit between September and January, for example. Others might have 2 recruitment windows, so one in semester 1, one in semester 2. And some postgraduate courses recruit all the way up to August, September time for kind of an October start. So it can be kind of very varied, and that's why it's really important to basically contact universities or course teams that you're interested in kind of potentially applying for and find out what those deadlines might be. Also important to be aware of things like January starts. So for quite a lot of master's courses, they have sort of 2 start dates. Some of them have start dates in September, October. Some also have start dates in January as well. And again, it may be that that's, kind of a benefit for you, or it may be that, you're looking to do something more within the typical academic year, but worth knowing that both of those exist. And if we've got any kind of international students on the call, just a reminder, it's worth checking requirements. What are the requirements of that particular postgraduate course? How does that kind of fit in with, say, like the Tier 4 student visa? What would you kind of need to do in advance? Those type of things. So just kind of the usual checks that you might do anyway as an international student. Yeah, really good question. It's just come through in the chat around sort of English language entry requirements. So things like the IELTS for international students. If you've already had to do it for bachelor's level, whether you'd have to do it again for master's level. So all of the kind of postgraduate sort of course web pages will tell you about this. So for example, if you go onto Sheffield Hallam's postgraduate courses, towards the bottom of the sort of information page for the course you're looking at, it will have all of those details. My guess would be if you've already got evidence of IELTS at that particular level, it wouldn't be something that you'd need to do again. But again, that's a really important thing to potentially check with the university themselves, because some universities may have different processes. Fab. Okay, great. Yeah, that seems to answer the question. Wonderful. So kind of moving on from that, really. Again, just in terms of what applications require, again, this can sort of differ between universities. And before I sort of mention that, one thing that's, again, quite important just to be aware of is with postgrad study, there isn't really a limit on how many courses you can apply for. So obviously at undergraduate, you've got that limit of 5, certainly in the UK, that you can apply for. For postgrad study, there isn't really a limit. You could apply for as many different courses at as many different universities as you wanted to. Obviously, we would always kind of urge caution with that, because postgrad applications, as we're going to talk about in a second, they're very time consuming, and often sort of require quite a lot of preparation and preparatory work, depending on what you've got to send across. So I would definitely sort of stress, kind of be cautious with that, but you have fewer limitations on how many courses you can apply for. So it's a good thing to be aware of. Most applications for postgrad require kind of a combination of some of the following. So again, it might not require all of these things, but probably a combination of a few of these different things. So usually a personal statement will be involved, and we're going to talk in a second about what a postgrad personal statement might look like, what they might be asking for. Usually it might require academic transcripts. So this would usually be after you'd received your degree, having to provide proof that you've got a certain level of undergraduate degree. For some master's courses or postgrad courses, they may ask for a particular undergraduate level. So for example, 2.2 or 2.1 or a first. So it's really useful to kind of check that, when you're applying, because again, even if you get a place on a master's course or a postgrad course, if you then get maybe a grade that's below that, you would need to go back to the university and check whether they'd still be happy to accept you onto the course with a slightly lower grade than what you'd predicted. So academic transcripts, something that would kind of come further down the line. Usually kind of some form of references are required. So again, these are usually kind of academic references. So asking kind of people who've sort of taught you already or kind of worked with you already in an academic capacity. But you can also have, industry references as well. And for some courses, that might be really valuable, because it might be that you're undertaking a master's course that has an industry element to it, a placement. And so if you've already done some industry work experience and you've got a reference, you can say, this is my experience of working with this person. That could be really valuable. What I would suggest is, if you're thinking about applying for postgraduate study, or if you're applying or starting to apply already, I would get in touch with one of your academic sort of tutors as soon as you can, who you're thinking of using as a reference, basically just to let them know that you'd like to use them as a reference, because again, their time may be limited and they may have other people asking to be a reference, other people asking them to be a reference as well. So if you are thinking of using a particular member of academic staff as a reference, I would say, get in touch with them as soon as you can. Some postgraduate courses might also ask for a CV. So they might say, can you give us an example of your, just basically your skills, your experience to date? And again, there might be different reasons for that. If it's more of a research-focused master's course or postgrad course, they might be looking for more of an academic CV. So tell us about maybe kind of research you've been involved in, or conferences you've attended, or papers that you've published. If it's something that's more of a kind of taught masters, they might be wanting to know about, what have you done on your undergraduate degree, or have you got any relevant experience that links to the master's course or postgrad course that you're going to be doing. That's also kind of true for portfolios. So if you're applying for maybe a creative course, so for example, something like the MA in design at Sheffield Hallam, so things like product design or fine art, graphic design, illustration, you may well require a portfolio as well that demonstrates, your kind of ability in that area, or examples of your work, just to show that you're at the relevant standard needed to do that course. So do be aware of that as well. And again, they should have that information on the website for that particular course you're looking at. Fab. Direct question that's just come through. I'll perhaps kind of pick that up at the end if that's okay. But yeah, there's a good question there about sort of places, I suppose. So if it's a new kind of course, whether, people aren't 100% sure if that's, are they going to have enough places, or is that course definitely going to run if it's the first time that course has run before? And that's something I'll kind of pick up at the end if that's okay, but it's a really, really good question, certainly. In terms of kind of some of the more research-focused postgrad courses as well, maybe that you're also required to submit a research proposal, and that might be for something like an MRes, for example, and certainly for a PhD. So this would kind of actually be the focus of the research that you were wanting to do as part of that course. And again, there's some really good resources on the Prospects website, which I've included in links on this slide, tell you all about writing a research proposal and what that looks like. In terms of kind of the personal statement, this is a very, very basic breakdown. But again, if you go onto the Prospects website, they've got some fantastic resources on writing a postgraduate personal statement and how it kind of differs from maybe an undergraduate one. Core differences really when it comes to kind of postgraduate personal statements is, you've kind of been through that sort of broader undergraduate education, and now you're looking at doing something more specialized or more specific, as somebody mentioned earlier on in the poll. So kind of with that in mind, it's really, really important to kind of actually think of this almost a little bit more like a cover letter for a job. You're thinking a lot more specific, a lot more tailored. Okay, why are you wanting to undertake study at this level? Why are you wanting to take your study further up to that postgraduate level? And why specifically are you interested in that course? How does that fit with your kind of career plans and where you want to take that course afterwards? So this is another really good reason to actually research postgraduate study before you kind of consider applying, and really think about, is it the right thing for me right now? Because actually that's a lot of the stuff that you're going to be talking about on the postgrad personal statement. It's really thinking about, why am I interested in doing this course now? How is it potentially going to help me? How is it going to link with my career interests? Because that's something that the admissions tutors are going to want to know. They're going to want to know, have you thought carefully about why you want to do postgrad study and why this particular course? So some of the key things just to kind of bear in mind, your interest in this particular subject area, but also your interest in this institution. So obviously you could apply for the same course at a number of different universities, but the key thing is, for that personal statement, it needs to be tailored. So you need to think about, okay, what is it about that particular university that makes you want to study there? Is it about their facilities? Is it about who's on their kind of academic teaching staff for the postgraduate course? Is it about their destination, so where their graduates move on to afterwards? Is it about the modules? Is it about kind of some of the opportunities you get as part of the course? For example, things like going on placement or undertaking kind of live industry projects. So the motivation side of things, really, really important. Great question that's come through in the chat about, can people see your grades from the undergraduate course? You'd need to provide them eventually. So basically that's where the academic transcripts come in. So typically when you're applying for a postgraduate course, you're not going to obviously have your final grades already. So what you'd be sending across would be effectively like predicted grades. So sometimes the postgraduate course might ask for your average from second year, for example, as kind of a bit of a predicted grade. Sometimes they won't. They'll just assume, if you're applying, that you're currently on track to achieve what they want you to achieve. So if the postgrad course says we expect people to have a 2-1 or above, if you were applying, they'd expect that you would achieve that. And obviously you then have to send across your academic transcripts after you'd finished your degree. If you'd got a lower grade, you might then have to discuss with them whether they'd still take you onto the course or whether you'd have to look at alternatives. So it's a really good question, but yes, eventually they will see your bachelor's grades. In terms of the personal statement, as we said, motivation really, really important. The other thing that's essential is actually thinking about, how can you demonstrate that you've got the skills, knowledge, and experience to make that step up to level 7 or kind of master's level, postgraduate level study? So this is really about kind of two things. At first, it's about sort of showing the skills that you've developed at undergraduate level that you can then translate to postgraduate. So things like, for example, independent research skills, the ability to work to kind of differing deadlines, managing kind of independent projects, those type of things, but also kind of the academic skills that you might need. So things like researching, referencing, undertaking research, for example. So that might include, for certain courses, things like statistical analyses, it might be report writing, it might be essay writing. So again, just kind of things that will demonstrate your sort of academic ability. But then the other side of that is also kind of talking about maybe skills and experiences that are more generally going to be useful for the master's course. So if, for example, you've got a postgraduate course that has got, like I say, a work experience element, it might be that you talk about live industry projects you've worked on as part of your undergraduate course, or it may be that you took part in a summer internship or a part-time job or volunteer work that basically shows that you've got some of the, I guess, more kind of like professional skills that you need and that you could bring to that master's course. So that might be, for example, things like, communication, collaborating online using things like, Google Docs, Trello, Zoom, just kind of awareness of those online digital technologies. It might be about kind of, sort of working with others. So potentially leading on projects or kind of working as part of a project team or a research team. So again, you can talk about all of those skills, knowledge, and experience that you could bring to that master's course that would help support your application. And again, to kind of come back to the research side that I talked about earlier, really, really important to, kind of do the research of the course, see what they're looking for. And we'll show an example of this in a second, and then kind of tailor your personal statement based on what they're going to be looking for as part of that course. So again, very much like a job, sort of job description and cover letter or job application, really thinking about, why would you be a good match for that course? What could you bring to that course? And why would it be the right fit for you at this point in your career? And these are just kind of a couple of examples, really just to kind of, I guess, emphasize why research is so important. This one on the left-hand side is from the Royal College of Arts. It provides a really, really specific breakdown of what they look for. This is just a small kind of snapshot of it. And I think this is for a kind of one of their MA design courses. So it gives you kind of a pretty sort of comprehensive idea of what they consider within their selection process. They mentioned that, it's actually all about what you can demonstrate within your portfolio. And it also kind of tells you a little bit about what they're actually kind of looking for in the type of person that sort of comes on the course. So they talk about, we want motivated, determined, critical thinkers. We want people who are kind of curious, independent. So they're giving you an idea of the type of person that they want on the course. And you would then be able to kind of tailor your personal statement and your portfolio to kind of match up to that. The reason that I show that is because that can be really, really different across different courses. So Royal College of Art have got something very, very specific, very, very directly related to kind of what they're looking for. Other universities might have something slightly more general. They might just want that typical, tell us about yourself, why are you interested in the course, why do you think that you've got the ability to step up to postgraduate level? So it can be very different from course to course, and that's why it's really important at postgrad level to do that research. The other reason for research being so important is actually it's quite good for sort of challenging your perception sometimes. So often people will look at a postgraduate course and go, that sounds really interesting, but I couldn't do that because of my undergraduate degree. A lot of postgraduate courses are open to people regardless of their undergraduate degree. So yes, there may be some courses where you have to have done an undergraduate degree in a specific subject. That is the case sometimes, certainly for some of the engineering courses, some technology courses, some healthcare courses, you have to have done an undergraduate degree in that subject. But for others, it's much more open, and it's really worth doing that research, just to see if there are other courses that you might have an interest in. So this example on the right is MSc Big Data. So this is all about kind of data analysis, data analytics. And you can kind of see here that down the bottom, it mentions about the academic requirements. So they talk about having kind of a minimum of a second-class honours degree in a numerate subjects such as maths, computing and engineering. However, applicants without these qualifications but with appropriate work experience might be encouraged to apply. So again, even when you've kind of got a course that's maybe very focused on a technical area, even if you don't have a degree in that subject, there may be other ways to kind of get onto that master's course in the future. And that might mean by gaining some experience within that industry first. So there are lots of different ways to kind of pursue postgraduate study. And I guess that's where the research really comes in, just making sure you feel clear on all of those options that are available to you. And then I suppose leading on to that really is thinking about, how might I fund that, or how might I finance postgraduate study once I've found, the relevant kind of courses or kind of pathways that I'm interested in. And again, unlike undergraduate funding, postgraduate funding is definitely a slightly kind of more sort of murky picture. There are many different ways that people can fund postgraduate study, quite different to the undergraduate level where you've just got that tuition fee loan, maintenance loan. It's quite a kind of relatively straightforward picture. So in terms of kind of the main bulk of funding for postgraduate courses, most people typically go through the UK government master's loan. So this is something that is targeted for UK students, and the idea behind this is it's borrowing up to X amount of money. So £11,570 is the current amount of money that you can claim. It's non-means tested, which means that everybody gets the same amount. And you can apply for it up to 6 months before or 6 months after the course starts. So this is something that would have to pay for every part of your course. So that would mean the tuition fees and any kind of money you needed to pay for accommodation, living costs, those type of things. So what it does tend to mean is that for the majority of people, they will tend to kind of work alongside postgraduate study in some shape or form, either through kind of part-time work or sometimes kind of working part-time whilst undertaking the master's part-time as well. So there are different ways that people will kind of fund their postgrad study. There are other sort of routes to look at as well. And again, I've included some links on the slide that I'll send over about all the different forms of postgrad study funding that you can find. Again, Prospects has got a really, really good breakdown of these on their website. So you have, for example, things like non-repayable scholarships and bursaries. These are usually found on individual university websites. So things like, Sheffield Hallam have got alumni scholarships, and they do things like postgraduate study discounts, which I'll talk about in a second. But lots of universities have these kind of same, I guess, kind of funding routes as well. So, they might have scholarships for people from particular backgrounds. They might have bursaries for particular courses where maybe there's a shortage of people doing that job in the UK, for example. For kind of PhDs, there are PhD loans or Research Council grants. And again, lots of good information on Prospects about how to apply for those and what those look like. And then there's also a variety of other forms of funding as well. So things like charitable grants, so things like the Leverhulme Trust, Richard Stapley Educational Trust. So these are kind of, I guess, one-off payments that you can apply for, again, depending on the type of course or background. There's employer sponsorship. So some people choose to kind of basically look at working for companies where they've got the possibility of being sponsored for undertaking a master's or a postgrad course. That doesn't always happen straight away, but that's something that, again, if you're kind of interviewing for a graduate job, you can always ask about. And then, as I say, numerous other ways that people kind of tend to fund kind of postgrad study. For a lot of people, it's kind of things like part-time work. Some people will even use things like crowdfunding, for example, to cover associated costs. And as I said, within universities, there are, and kind of nationally, there are sort of other sources of funding you can search for. So I've included some search engines here for small postgraduate study grants. So again, one-off bits of funding. Certain universities, so I've used an example here of Hallam, have things like hardship funds or kind of, again, bursaries or success scholarships you can apply for. And other kind of postgraduate courses also have slightly different systems as well. So for example, teaching, so teacher training, that's all based on the undergraduate loan system. And again, it's not something that is connected to your previous undergraduate loan. So it's a completely separate system, and is something that you apply for, quite differently to what you would normally for postgraduate funding. And the same with kind of some of the health and social care courses. Some of these have funding that's covered by the NHS, and it means that the courses are funded slightly differently. Sometimes means you can get more financial support, and sometimes means you don't need to kind of claim a master's loan to do that type of course. As we sort of talked about earlier, again, it's worth checking if you're thinking about maybe applying for the master's loan, checking whether the course is eligible. Is it a MA, MSc, MRes course? Is it something that falls under that kind of banner of a master's course? If it's a postgraduate diploma, you may not be able to get funding for it. In fact, most likely won't be able to get funding for it. So look at kind of, how much does that course cost? Are there other ways that I can fund that if I can't get a master's loan? So the funding for postgrad can kind of sometimes be a little bit sort of complex to navigate. There's lots of different options. As I say, the main one tends to be for kind of UK students, the master's loan itself. But there are other avenues. And again, it really depends on personal circumstances. But there certainly are kind of lots of sources of information for funding, which I've shared as part of these slides. Again, I will send over on our slides that I'll kind of email to you shortly after the session, all of these kind of images and links, which are sort of embedded in the pictures. These are kind of some of the useful resources I would definitely recommend having a look at when it comes to postgraduate study. Some of these websites we've talked about before, so things like the Prospects website, which has got a really good breakdown of kind of postgraduate study and different options, but it's also got a really good breakdown of different job profiles. So if, for example, you think, okay, I'm interested in going into this type of industry and I think I need a postgraduate qualification, but I'm not sure, that can kind of be a really good way of breaking down and sort of fact checking that, just to make sure that, you know for sure, do you need that qualification or not? And then there are some other really good kind of websites and resources that I've talked about. So things like Find a Master's, Find a PhD, lots of great advice and a good search engine for finding different courses. Target Jobs Postgrad has also got some really nice advice resources on. And then I've included a couple of other resources that are worth having a look at for, I guess, kind of just connecting with people. So things, for example, like LinkedIn or the Hallam Collective. The Hallam Collective is kind of like our internal network for Sheffield Hallam students and graduates. If you kind of use those platforms, they're a really good way to actually connect with former Sheffield Hallam graduates who maybe have done the courses that you're looking at, and just kind of giving yourself a bit of a better idea about what's it like to study that course, and where did it help that person get to afterwards. So I think, to come back to the point I was making earlier, always kind of fact check and myth bust and really make sure that you've got a good idea about, is postgraduate study going to be the right thing for me at this point in my career? And, how can I find out more about that? And connecting with people is often a really, really good way to do that. On the left-hand side, I've also included a link to how you can book an appointment with our employability advisors at Sheffield Hallam. Hopefully it goes without saying, but again, this is something that we can support with, at any point, not just during your final year, but after you've graduated as well. So our careers service operates on a lifelong support policy. So even if you're not going straight into postgraduate study, but you're thinking about options maybe for next year or the year after, you can book appointments one-to-one with any of our advisors to talk about postgrad study, potentially to talk through some of the options, talk about what you feel is going to be right for you, and to support with things like writing a personal statement, discussing funding options, all of those different things. So lots of support that's available through our careers team. Just before we finish, a reminder really that as part of the class of 2022 support offer for final year students like yourself, there are actually postgraduate discounts on some Sheffield Hallam courses, which you can find out about on the class of 2022 web pages, which I've shared on this slide. What I would say again is the same sort of word of caution I've been giving throughout the session, really, which is, sometimes kind of when you've got discounted postgraduate courses can seem like a really attractive option, because again, it brings that sort of overall cost down of doing postgraduate study, but really worth thinking about. Number one, is it the right thing for you at this point in time, in terms of your career development? And number two, is Hallam the right university for you? And, it may well be that the type of course you want to do or the type of pathway you want to take, you may need to or want to look at different universities. And of course, that's absolutely fine. So, really worth kind of just considering those questions, even if you're looking at, or you find the idea of kind of discounted courses quite attractive. If you've got any kind of direct questions about sort of postgraduate study at Hallam, these are some good resources to have a look at. So, this is kind of like the inquiries email address and the admissions email address. They also have a phone number, and there's also a live chat where we have kind of postgraduate student ambassadors who you can talk to about their experience on their courses. What I would say is that most universities will have this type of thing on their website. So if you're looking outside of Sheffield Hallam for postgraduate study, which many of you may be, do have a look on the university websites. They should all have something like this where you can talk to their admissions teams, or you can talk to kind of students who are currently, postgraduate ambassadors to find out a little bit more about particular courses. So, do have a look for that. And as I sort of mentioned earlier, really highly recommend doing that research, going to things like open days, finding out about the courses first, before you kind of put in an application. On that note, we have actually got a postgraduate open day coming up at Sheffield Hallam this Wednesday. So it's from 4 till 7 p.m. Again, I've included a link on there for anyone who might want to sign up. But equally, all universities will have postgraduate open days coming up between now and the end of the summer. Do have a look at their websites. They should have all the information on there. A lot of the open days are now online, which does mean it's a little bit easier for you to attend. A lot of them have kind of live chat. But for some of you, you may want to go physically to the university to get an idea of the campus and location. And a lot of them are moving back to physical open days too, with the COVID restrictions relaxing. So, there will probably be options there. So that kind of pretty much brings me to the end of the session. I'm going to end the recording in a second and pick up any questions that I haven't covered via the chat. Just a reminder, though, that this is only the first session as part of our class of 2022 week. We've got a whole bunch of other sessions coming up this week. A session at 12:30 today on finding that graduate job, and one at 2 p.m. this afternoon on kind of exploring different options after final year, including things like postgrad study, but also graduate jobs, working for yourself, and gap years, and a range of other really good sessions coming up throughout the week. We've got some LinkedIn headshot sessions taking place at Careers Connect from 12 to 1 tomorrow. We've got a session all about our RISE graduate jobs in the Sheffield region at 11 o'clock on Wednesday. And then on Friday, we've got an alumni panel event with 6 graduates from Sheffield Hallam talking about what they've been doing since they finished. So lots and lots of good stuff that you can book onto via our class of 2022 pages. And just a reminder that all of the careers support and the enterprise support available through Sheffield Hallam is available on a lifelong basis for graduates. So if you want to talk about anything we've covered today, longer term, even after you finish the degree, you can come back and access that support from our 2 services, Careers and Employability, an enterprise, which is more about working for yourself, self-employment and business startup. All of that support's available on a lifelong basis. Okay, what we'll do is I'll just kind of end the recording there, and then I'll pick up those questions directly in the chat. Okay. So thank you for those who've been watching sort of on the recording, and we'll end the recording there.